Hello and welcome. Welcome to today's CivEx. I am Gina Roberts, and I am the Voter Education Director for the Arizona Citizens Clean Elections Commission. I'm really happy to be here with you today, and I thank you for taking the time to join us. Our topic of discussion today is running for office, and I'm really excited to host this workshop in partnership with the nonpartisan Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flinn Foundation. The center hosts these CivEx in the hopes of creating opportunities for the public to have a better understanding about public policy issues that can impact their communities. And so it's a great way to learn about, again, politics and policy. And so we are really grateful to be here today with you all in the hopes of sharing information with you about how to run for office. We have top experts in the state in this panel discussion for you today. I'm very excited to introduce them to you. And before we get to the introduction of our panelists, I would like to ask that everybody please don't wait until the end of the panel discussion to submit any questions that you may have. There is a Q&A feature in this webinar, so please, throughout the discussion, feel comfortable, feel free to submit any questions that you may have, and we will be happy to get those to you. We are here for the next hour to be of service for you. So any questions that you have, big or small, about running for office, we are happy to answer those for you. The way our program is going to line up today is we will start with the basics on how to qualify for the ballot. So we'll go over, the forms that you need, filing officers, campaign finance, things like that, the basics. And then we'll transition into a discussion with our distinguished panelists to hear from them and their expertise about what really makes a successful campaign. So let's get started with learning a little bit more about who our panelists are today. And first, I'd like to introduce Stacy Pearson. Stacy is the co-founder of Lumen Strategies, which is a nationally recognized firm providing services for campaigns, public relations, public affairs, communications, advocacy, and political consulting. And Stacy is a wealth of knowledge. She has a 20-plus year career in the areas of these of expertise in these areas. And she's also an award-winning journalist. So her experience has led to more than 100 victories in her career. And she really does work across the entire state of Arizona. She continues to represent some of the states and the nation's leading brands and companies, and of course, recognizable people. And we are so grateful to have Stacy here with us today. Her resume, her CV is amazing. And so I encourage you to visit her website, which is lumenaz.com, to learn more about her and the services that she offers, because I cannot do it justice right now. And the same goes for our next panelist, who is Constantin Querard. And Constantin is the founder of Grassroots Partners. Constantin has decades of experience in the political arena, and his firm does campaign consulting and public affairs work. And Constantin has been active in politics for decades. He's worked on a variety of campaigns ranging from lower level jurisdictions, from school board elections, all the way up to presidential elections. And his track record is very successful as well, with hundreds of victories. And Constantin was actually named in 2015 one of the best campaign consultants by the Arizona Capital Times. And then our final panelist today is Tom Collins, who is the Executive Director of the Arizona Clean Elections Commission. And as Executive Director, Tom is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day activities of the Commission, which provides a public and voter education campaign, clean funding options for candidates, and campaign finance enforcement. Tom was an Assistant Attorney General previously at the Attorney General's office, where he focused on election law, appeals, and Attorney General opinions. Tom actually had the distinct pleasure to clerk for Justice Scott Bales and the late Justice Michael Ryan of the Arizona Supreme Court. So again, we have a wonderful lineup today of very experienced and informative and knowledgeable folks to share tips with you, again, in your interest in running for office. So again, I want to thank the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flinn Foundation for hosting us. And we will jump into the first part of our session, which again is going over those basics of how to qualify for the ballot. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom. And Tom, if you could share your screen with us, we do have some slides to share with everybody. And again, just a reminder, as we go through this, please feel free to put any questions that you may have in that Q&A feature, and I'll be sure to check for those, and we'll definitely get you some answers. So Tom, go ahead and take it away.
Sorry, I had an unmute moment, but I unmuted before I spoke, so that's a real accomplishment. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Thank you, Gina, for the introduction, and thanks to the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership for hosting this. So my job is to try to lay out, as Gina said, some of the basics of running for office in terms of I'll just preview. There's a lot of paperwork. Um, and that can be a little intimidating to folks, as it is with everything. In fact, there's a story in the Republic the other day that said that if you tried to find out how to run for the Phoenix City Council, you had to go to like 3 different websites to figure that out. So hopefully, at least for our purposes here today, this will help bring that all together in one place. So the basics. The first thing I think many of you probably know is whether or not you are in a party or an independent is an important question. And that's important because it determines your ballot qualification in 2 ways. Number one, the number of signatures you need to gather on petitions in order to qualify for the ballot. And number two, whether or not there will be a primary election or you will proceed directly to the general election. So we have currently 4 recognized parties in the state of Arizona. While those parties would have a primary election, and that is even if it's unopposed, the primary election happened, your name would be on the ballot. Whereas independent candidates are simply, if they qualify, sent to the general election ballot. Candidates who start out, a couple things really key. Number one, you're going to want to file something called a statement of interest. A statement of interest is filed with the filing officer. So we're going to hear the term a lot in elections, filing officer. What does that mean? It means, depending on your level, the Secretary of State at the state level, county recorder at the county level, city clerk at the city level. And statement of interest is critical because it tells the public you're wanting to run and kicks off your ability to gather signatures. If you don't file your statement of interest, those signatures for your petitions, which are the coin of the realm in terms of actually getting on the ballot, are not going to count. A quick word about school boards. The statement, we'll see I mentioned, I missed it there on the first slide, but statement of organization. School boards, at least in Maricopa and Pima, the statement of interest, that is to say, I want to run, goes to the county superintendent. The statement of organization is important. Statement of organization is your actual campaign itself. That is setting up your actual, who's your campaign chair, who's your treasurer, and it's by initiating the campaign committee, that is going to be your mechanism for reporting your expenditures and contributions. So that's sort of basically the basics of setting up. You got to tell the appropriate person, which in most of the times will be the filing officer, except for if it's a school board superintendent of the county. And then you need to file a statement of organization that says you're going to be raising and spending money to be a candidate. You see here that when your time comes to get printed on the ballot, this is the information you're going to need to bring to the Secretary of State's office, and there's similar information that you need to bring to any other filing office. That includes your nomination petition. So you'll see, and you probably have already seen if you've been at political events, candidates out there gathering those signatures, your nomination paper, and then a financial disclosure statement. Typically, your filing officer will have a candidate packet that will tell you all the stuff I've just said and how to do it. And then you'll need to obtain a minimum amount of signatures on your nominating petitions. And then for legislative candidates, the petitions have to be signed by a person who lives in your district, and they have to be signed by a person who can vote for you. So in Arizona, for state legislative elections or for statewide elections, that's someone who is in your party or an independent. Then after you file that, we get into a period called the candidate challenges. Many of you are probably familiar about reading about this. This is the period after the filing deadline for state legislative and corporation commission candidates next year, where people will sue and say your signatures are invalid. This person didn't live where they said they lived, this person's signature doesn't match, et cetera, et cetera. We want to say a quick word about write-in candidates. Write-in candidates are required to file all the other documents as well. And there's a deadline of not later than 40 days prior to the primary or general. It's only if you're a candidate who files these documents that you're considered an official write-in candidate, and that makes a difference because in order for a vote to count for you, you actually have to be an official write-in candidate. If someone just writes your name in on the ballot and you haven't filed this paperwork, that's not a vote. Another feature that you'll become familiar with relatively quickly, especially if you're running in the state legislative election, is eQual. eQual is an electronic signature system. It also allows you to collect $5 qualifying contributions if you were to run with the Clean Funding Program, which we'll talk a bit more about in a second. It's easy to use. It's also good because the system bounces the person who wants to sign your petition name off of the voter database, and therefore will only present to them candidates they're qualified to sign for. And additionally, it reduces the amount of uncertainty around a signature by basically eliminating the ability to challenge that signature. We want to say a quick word about campaign funding. In Arizona, we are one of a handful of states that offers two types of way of funding. One we call traditional, which is any candidate in the state can raise contributions, private contributions. That means PACs, that means individuals. You can't raise money from corporations directly, and there are limits on how much money you can take at a given time. And then at the state level, there's the Clean Funding Program. There is a similar program, operates a little differently in the city of Tucson, but for our purposes, Clean Elections operates the Clean Funding Program that's available for statewide and legislative candidates. In order to qualify, you're going to get a different set of signatures and $5 qualifying contributions, and then you get a set amount of money to run with. You do have to, and then you can take a certain amount of limited early money, but it has to come only from individuals. This is the form that you would fill out if you wanted to do that as well. And these are the amounts of money for the current election cycle. These are adjusted periodically by the Secretary of State's office. There's also, and this gets into the weeds a little bit, but for your future reference, if you're an independent, there's a little bit different funding formula. And if you are in what's called a one-party dominant district, that is to say that where there's a calculation the statute authorizes that says whether or not if the primary is really the election, so to speak, the amount of funding that you're provided, you get your general funding in the primary and your primary funding in the general. There are reporting requirements related to this, and so every campaign has to have a treasurer. A candidate can be their treasurer. Clean Elections, we generally, if you ask us, generally recommend that you have someone who is experienced being a treasurer be your treasurer. And that's in part because all of these campaign finance disclosures you're going to have to fill out are crucial and important to get correct. So for example, when it's time to make reports, you're going to have to, provide information about, anything of value you've gotten towards your campaign. And you're going to include all your contributions accepted by the committee through that reporting period. You're going to have to find the name and address and occupation of the contributor. You can aggregate if you're in state and at a certain level, talking about state elections, not federal here. But for all contributions by the state of individuals, you're going to have to provide all that information. So again, why is it important to have a good treasurer? Is because you're going to need this level of detail, and you're going to need to be able to provide a reason why you don't have it. There are exceptions, of course, to contributions, and these are very important and I think that both of our experts will talk more about this. As you're financing a campaign, knowing what's a contribution and what's not is knowing what is reportable and what's not in many cases, and an important aspect of assessing your cost structure for your campaign. I think one of the things two things that are really important at the state and legislative level are the political party exception, which says that when you're the party nominee, the party can spend in coordination with you, which increases the amount of spending you can do. And then your legal and accounting services are not considered a campaign contribution. Likewise, you're going to have to report your expenditures. And that is sort of the end of the nuts and bolts, if that wasn't too bad.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I think really the gist of what you were sharing is that if you're decided to run, you have to create a committee, right? You're acknowledging and you're filing the official paperwork with the appropriate filing officer. With that comes responsibilities in terms of tracking your expenditures, your contributions, your campaign finance requirements, and then you have options, at least if you're running for state and legislative office, on how you are going to fund your campaign. So to our audience members, I know that we're going to be presenting a lot of information here today with you, and again, this is really high level. We will absolutely be sending out the slides along with a recording of this video in a follow-up email. It'll also be available on the center's website and YouTube channel. And of course, follow up if there's any questions that you have, or if you actually decide to run for office and you go through that and you have questions, you can always reach out to Clean Elections. Our website is azcleanelections.gov. And of course, our panelists, you can contact them too if you decide that you would like to get their insights. You have, again, Constantine's website is grassrootpartners.com, and then Stacy's website is lumenaz.com. So, we're not going to just present you with all this information and say, go figure it out. We will still be here after the fact. So with that said, we actually do have a question, Tom, that we'll go ahead and jump into right now. Can you talk about the history between running clean and winning, and how many people in key offices ran clean elections campaigns? I know that's something that we get that question a lot. And I don't know if maybe Constantine wants to jump in with that too. But Tom, I'll turn that over to you for a response.
Okay. Yes. So currently, the history of clean elections is that in the early 2000s, the clean elections funding formula was different than it is now, and at that time, there were many more candidates who ran successfully and ran clean in general. Now we're down significantly from that heyday in terms of but there are still a number of legislators, including newer, younger legislators who have run clean just in the last last election cycle. And those folks some of those folks are already in leadership. So, and then every single member of the Corporation Commission ran clean. Additionally, we've had a recent superintendent of public instruction, and other candidates. I think that Constantine has a longer history with clean elections than I have, and I've been doing this a while. But the one thing I will say is that you kind of have to look at your capacity. In other words, the amount of money that you saw on that slide that's available for the treasurer is basically the exact same amount of money the Democratic candidate for treasurer raised in the 2022 campaign cycle. So, and that comes at a significantly less expense to the candidate. So you've got to look at your expenditures, you got to look at your costs, you've got to look at the exceptions, and then you've also got to look at your ability, if you're running in a partisan election, to work with your party.
Thank you, Tom. Well, I think obviously deciding how you're going to fund your campaign is a discussion to have with your campaign consultants. So let's actually transition into the panel discussion portion. And I think why don't we go ahead and start with Stacy? Let's go ahead and jump into our first question. So, what do you think that people who are considering running for office, maybe it's their first time, what should potential candidates think about before making the commitment to run? And when does that decision need to be made? We're almost at the end of 2023 here. We've got, a lot of elections coming up in 2024. So what are some of the things folks should be thinking about if they want to run?
So there's both the personal and then the actual campaign management components. On the personal side, I can't stress this enough. People have to consider whether or not they like strangers criticizing them online. We just live in a difficult, vitriolic environment, and there will be a lunatic named Stacy P 51932 who tells you that they don't like your photo. Like it's just insanity. So there's that. And if you can find humor in that criticism, if you can find humor in the lunacy, if you can find humor in it, that's great. I would also recommend getting a good therapist to work your way through some of that very unfounded and unfair criticism. It doesn't matter what you're running for, it happens. And then on the professional side, it's often smart to align your campaign launch with the beginning of a quarterly fundraising report cycle. So one of the unfortunate, one of the measures of a candidate's viability is how much money that they've raised, or in clean elections, obviously clean elections being an exception, but how much money they've raised. And so you'll see lots of candidates getting in, for example, October 1st. I think we'll see a Senate candidate, where rumor has a Senate candidate's going to get in next week. You'll see lots, and then the reporting period closes at the end of the calendar year, so it's quarterly. And so we'll see another tranche of candidates, I think, jump in after the first of the year. By April 1st, folks are really, in some cases, running out of time, or maybe it's a crowded field. So you'll see folks largely launching a campaign at the beginning of a fundraising cycle. Folks that have very deep pocketbooks if they fundraise later, but give yourself as much time to get on the runway as possible. So yeah, that's really it. So get a therapist and pay close attention to the calendar and turn off social media notifications on your phone. And
campaigns are well underway right now, right, for 2024. So it's already started. And you bring up a couple of good points too that, Constantine, I'm hoping maybe you can share some information with us on about what kind of initial support is needed. So, whether that's from, the voting base or maybe even the parties. Do you need to have your political party support before you decide to jump into, if it's a partisan race? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think the first support you need to make sure you have is your family support. It sounds cliche, but you're running, which means your spouse is kind of running, your kids are kind of running, your parents are kind of running. They kind of have it tougher because somebody takes a shot at you, you can shoot back. But the spouse generally is supposed to kind of sit there and take it, and they get to absorb all the abuse. But when the spouses start firing back, it becomes a whole story, and they're not supposed to do that. So you want to make sure your family is supportive. You need to have a certain amount of financial support. You can run clean. That is definitely an option. And the nice thing about it is you don't necessarily have to have deep pockets to be a candidate. So clean elections does kind of empower sort of the average Joe to get out there and do stuff. But even that, there's limitations to that depending on the quality of your opponents and how deep their pockets are. You need a political base, really. That is nice to have. Anybody can run. If you're running for the school board, you don't necessarily need a political base. It's friends, neighbors, it's whatever. But if you're running for kind of a higher office, this is largely a function of coalition building. It's this whole collection of disparate interests that rally behind candidate A or candidate B. And so just knowing that you've got sort of a team that you can get behind you, people that will support you with their time and their treasure, is really important. The party support is nice. It's not required. Generally, parties will stay out of primaries anyway. They should. So your support is what you need to win the primary. Beyond that, then you do want party support. And if you're in the case where let's say you're a Democrat running in sort of a solid Republican district, you may not have a primary. The party may come to you and say, if you run, we'll support you. So you may get that support early, depending on the kind of race you have. So anything you can get in terms of a political base is nice, a financial base is nice, and just to know your family is supportive as well.
All right. Fantastic. So definitely having these conversations with your family sounds like it's key. So let's say that somebody has gone through that, they've made the decision to run. I imagine most folks make the decision to run too because they're passionate about something. There's something that they care about. So what are some tips that you have to help those candidates sort of formulate and create their platform for their candidacy? What are their campaign priorities and their policy positions? And sometimes we hear the term single issue candidate and things like that. So what kind of tips do you have for candidates to help them really formulate what their priorities are going to be as they launch their campaign?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice I could give on this is you have to believe what you're saying. The voters can smell inauthenticity, and you just can't overcome it. So if you are running for a school board and you believe in lowering classroom sizes, you're going to have to repeat that elevator speech so many times your brain's going to turn to mush. And so you really have to believe in it. If you're running for other higher office, there are issues that are going to just, like, let's say you're running for state legislature, you're going to have to know a handful of things about water. You're going to have to know a handful of things about crime. You're going to have to know where education funding stands statewide. I mean, you will really you will get into a rhythm where the questions you're being asked are frequent and repetitive. And you'll just have to have this information down cold. The place I would not call for priorities is social media, because folks on social, they're just crazy. Like, it doesn't matter what party you're a member of. You put out a policy position, you say something publicly, and then just don't read the comments. Like, it's so insanely demoralizing. Just stick to your guns. You don't have to respond to the criticism. Hold a position, believe in it, and you'll repeat it until your own ears bleed.
Constantine, I think maybe you had some comments on that too.
Yeah, and if she's right, I mean, if you're running for the school board, there will be sort of a narrower set of issues. You may still have 5 or 6 or 7 things you're doing within education as a school board, but you get to sort of focus in that one specialized area. Same thing for, like, let's say, corporation commission. If you're running for the legislature, you're running for Congress, whatever, obviously you have this whole gamut of issues. So I would take your time, kind of, this is one of the things you can do even before you announce, because you may want some of this stuff on your website when you announce. Make a list of the topics you think will matter. You can kind of get some feedback from your friends on that. It might be 5 of them, might be 15 of them. Hopefully it's not more than 15. Pick the top 8, 10, 12, and then write your positions on each and take your time on that. You may end up writing a paragraph, you may end up writing 4 paragraphs. Once you're done with that, then you'll distill it, or you can work with your campaign guy, whatever, to knock it down to maybe 3 or 4 sentences. Ultimately, you don't want to present the voters with more than sort of that short bit. They want to know where you stand. They don't want to read a long dissertation. So it's good that your thought process goes through the process of, here's my detailed whatever, but don't give that to the world. They want to know that you can knock it down to 3 or 4 sentences yourself. And like Stacy says, you're going to be making those elevator pitches in a variety of rooms and settings where you get 2 minutes as a candidate or 3 minutes as a candidate. You're going to want this stuff buttoned up pretty tight yourself.
Let's actually take a second now to turn to how do we communicate that with the voters. And so I want to hear from all the panelists on this, but first I'm going to pitch it to Tom here. Can we talk about maybe some of the resources available to candidates for communicating and connecting directly with voters on those policy platforms that they have developed?
Sure. Thank you. So one of the other things that Arizona does a really good job of that maybe other states don't as much, is we actually provide a lot of different ways that voters can get information through the state, or in some cases your school board, county school superintendent. So, at Clean Elections, we have 2 specific programs that Gina leads that are designed to inform voters expressly about candidates. One of them is our voter education guide, which is a document that is also online, but that goes out to every household in the state with a voter. We have that zoned for legislative by district, which helps make it more usable and obviously keeps the cost down. And that's an opportunity for everyone who's running for a position who's qualified and going to be on the ballot to submit a statement essentially of why they want to run. So that elevator pitch type document that Stacy and Constantine have mentioned can go in there. And then the Clean Elections Commission also sponsors a debate series for legislative candidates and statewide and federal candidates that different formats for different offices. But that's an opportunity for candidates to talk directly to voters who are in their constituency about those issues and interact with both the moderator and their opponents if they have any there. The Secretary of State's office also provides an online place where you can put all that information as well. And so I think, and then there's a number of different groups, as Constantine mentioned, there are these opportunities that different organizations will host for candidates and among other things. But from a state perspective, I really do think that Arizona is pretty advanced in actually providing folks information about who's on their ballot, in addition to the logistics of how to make sure you can cast it.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. So along this same path, Stacy, resources are finite, right? You're obviously the funds that you have are precious. The time that you have as a candidate is precious and valuable. So how do you advise your clients on what tactics they should be utilizing to communicate with voters? How do they connect with voters to again really share those policy platforms, but also build that name recognition too? So when you're operating under these finite resources, and again, just looking at am I running for Congress, right, or am I running for city council? Looking at the district and how many people you have to reach, and then what is available to you in terms of resources. What should candidates be considering and how they look at their campaigns from a tactical perspective when it comes to communications?
So it's very interesting. There's that infamous Lee Iacocca quote that 50% of my marketing is working. I just don't know which 50%. And so what often happens is the budget does drive that strategy. Axios had a story published last week where Arizona, again, is going to be the most expensive state for this next presidential election or this 2024 cycle. Candidates are expected to spend nearly $900 million to get elected in Arizona's new position as a swing state. So some of the more traditional avenues, that your television commercials and your radio commercials, even digital advertising, is going to get more expensive in a way that very literally Arizona has never seen. But some of the traditional stuff still works, and it is important. So mail pieces to folks' houses, it still works. People still look at their mail for roughly 45 seconds before they put it in the trash, but they saw you and they saw that you were for lowering classroom sizes or reducing the federal deficit or whatever in it. To Tom's point, like the words, you just need to have that very concise. And then also that the voter guide that Clean Elections produces is extraordinarily well read. I mean, people we've tested this. People take it, they hang on to it, they throw it in their mail bin. When their ballot comes, they flip through the ballot and they flip through this newsprint guide. And there's something very tactical about this newsprint guide that's very trustworthy. People like it. They open it up, they read it, they flip to who's for and against ballot propositions, they look at what the candidates had to say about themselves. It's very, very important. And then the other component that's probably the least expensive is just building a good email database. So if you're replacing an incumbent, ask them for their list. If you are in a district with state legislators, if you're running for city council, call the state legislator that's representing that area and make friends with them and see if you can share lists. When you're getting folks to sign your petition to get qualified for the ballot, have a separate piece of paper, ask folks for their email address. And you don't want to bombard them to the point that they unsubscribe, but sometimes there are very important points of time where you should communicate with folks, like the week ballots go out, for example.
That's fantastic. And you made my day, Stacy. But Constantine, your background, you had a company before that actually provided these campaign products, the High Noon campaign product services that you turned into Grassroots Consulting. So tell me a little bit more about what you were seeing in terms of, what these tactics would be, what is successful, and also what, you would currently recommend to your clients, again, given those finite resources.
Yeah, and it really does depend on your resources and the races that you're in. Even if we just compare, like, say, like statewide candidates, Kimberly runs for state treasurer, right? So she's focused on, there's 3 million voters in the state. I think she spent less than $300,000. That was her whole budget. So she's talking, what, 10 cents per voter. So she could put up some signs, she can get some signatures, and she's got maybe enough money to send everybody like a text message, right? So that better be one a heck of a text message. Katie Hobbs spent like $13.5 million. Okay, same voter universe, but now she's got like $4.50 per voter, right? So she can do more things. She can send mail, she can do more digital, she can get on TV and stuff. Mark Kelly, same universe, spends $93 million, right? So he's got like, I don't know, he's got 300 times the spending per voter that a Kimberly does. So obviously, the more you have, the more tactics you can pursue. It really is going to depend on your race, and that's, I think, where someone like Stacy or I can be helpful in terms of what's the right mix. You can't generally afford to talk to everyone. Mark Kelly can afford to talk to everybody. Kimberly can't afford to talk to everybody. Most of you who might run for office won't be able to afford to talk to everybody. So who should you talk to? Which voters do you take for granted? Which voters are out of reach? If these are our target universes, how do they get their messaging? Because depending on their age, their background, their education level, it may be more digital, it might be more mail, it might be more text, might be, there's all these different things we can do. So it really does vary. I wish I could just say the formula is this, and then everybody could just go do it. But some of it's science, some of it's art, some of it's just, it's chefs in the kitchen. It's just sort of that different mix of flavors to get that winning recipe. And it's going to depend on the particulars of your race. It also depends on your opponent, because your opponent and what they're doing and spending, if they're spending more than you, it can dictate what your response needs to be. So there's too many variables to just say it's A plus B equals C. But that's just some of the things you have to consider.
Fantastic. So it looks like we have some questions that I want to jump to. It looks like one of the questions is, does the voter guide include school board candidates? And if not, what would be the equivalent? The voter guide the printed voter guide does not include school board candidates. However, any candidate running in the state of Arizona, regardless of what jurisdiction, whether that's a city council, justice of the peace, or school board candidate, they can create a profile on the Clean Elections website with their information, with their photo, their statement, their policy platforms, their contact information, their social media links, and the printed guide that goes out to every household with a registered voter includes a link to that information. So the printed guide will not have every candidate in the state, but the website will, as long as those candidates are willing to create those profiles. And then we have another question here. What is the process for order of candidates on the ballot? Tom, I don't know if you want to comment on that, but essentially the order is designed in state statute. So it will list the offices that must appear in their order. So obviously, first we're going to be looking at in a presidential election, we would have the presidential electors, then we get into our federal races, our US Senate, our congressional candidates, and then ranking at the state level, governor, state senator, and so on. So that is prescribed in statute and what that order of candidates looks like.
Yeah, that's the order of races. If you're wondering about the actual order of candidates, like, is it alphabetical, whatever, it actually rotates, it's random, and then it varies by precinct. So everybody gets the same number of chances to be first, second, third on the ballot.
Thank you for that. Yes. And let's see. So let's jump into one of our next questions here. Let's go. We talked about communication. Let's go back to a little bit more about the structure and developing your campaigns. We talked about how to get support. Let's talk about volunteers. So how do you get people, when you think of support for a candidacy, you're looking at, obviously, you want the votes, right? You want voters, you want donations. What about getting folks to actually donate their time to work on your campaign? And how critical is it to get volunteers to work with you on your campaign? So, Stacy, if you want to comment on that.
Sure. Voters respond extraordinarily well to other humans. It's the antithesis of an online social media environment. People don't go crazy when they're interacting with someone collecting signatures or someone knocking on their door. So volunteers are extraordinarily important, particularly with a field program where you're knocking, and these are, at precinct level races, or I'm sorry, in legislative district races. It's very important. And the easiest way to find volunteers is to start engaging. I'm using state legislature as an example. Start engaging with your precinct committeemen. Start going to those meetings. Let yourself be known. Make some friends. There's usually a large group of volunteers in those legislative districts who are already knocking on doors. So another palm card talking about Stacy Pearson for LDX is not a big lift for them. And then the other issue is find the C3, like the nonprofit organizations that you are aligned with, or so really more the C4s, but find the passion projects. So there's going to be a choice initiative on November's ballot. If you are an endorsed Planned Parenthood candidate, that could be extraordinarily helpful. If it is young Dems from ASU that are doing projects in Tempe, they'll carry literature for you. And then more than anything else, you're going to have to torture your friends and family and ask them to go on walks with you. Ask them to text you if they see your sign down, or ask them or defaced if someone's scribbling mustaches on your face. You're just going to need your volunteers to engage your friends, family, and folks you're aligned with politically or positionally.
Okay, so that's fantastic information. And so, Constantine, off of that same vein there, what does a successful get out the vote campaign look like from a candidate's campaign? So, you're running, and maybe now early voting is starting. Ballots are going out. You have volunteers on your campaign. Stacy had mentioned knocking on doors. So are we still seeing, pounding the pavement is necessary, and, especially in Arizona's weather, or are we thinking get out the vote is now more of a digital component? And does it depend on, is it the youth vote? Who are you trying to reach? But what does really, from a candidate's perspective, voting has started, what should they be doing? What should the candidate be doing?
Yeah. While we're not saying it out loud, I've noticed the answer to about half your questions so far is pizza. So there's when you're making notes from today, remember pizza, because you're gonna have to take care of all these volunteers. Great for recruitment. Yeah, it's sort of all hands on deck. You've got 29 days of voting, and so it's this incredibly immersive experience where you spend every waking hour trying to reach voters who haven't voted yet. And again, it will depend on your budget. It will depend on your volunteers. Politics runs on time and money. Those are the two fuels that go into the gas tank. If you got all the money in the world, you don't need volunteers. You can pay for everything. On the other hand, if you've got just this army of volunteers, you don't need as much money because you're people powered. So that's the mix you're going for. Yeah, knocking doors is great, particularly the smaller races. Again, if you're statewide, it might be difficult to move the needle much just by door knocking. But if you're running for city council or school board or legislature, the door knocking is good. Phone banking is good. It's an August primary. The ballots go out in July. No one wants to knock on a door in July. No one wants to answer a door in July. So you may spend more time doing phone banking instead. Technology is great now. There's the apps that'll just load on your phone. The list of voters you need to call are right there. You just press the button, you connect right away. You can text. We have technology now to where you can upload your contacts into the database. The database will identify who on your contact list still hasn't gotten their ballot back. And with a press of a button, you could broadcast a text message to all of your friends saying, "Hey, did you get your ballot back yet?" So there's all kinds of things that we can do. But it's to the degree it can be people powered, that's best. We do, like Stacy says, we respond to people better than we do to digital prompts or to TV ads or radio. Just the person at your door, the person you know, or the person calling you is most effective. It's just going to be a function of what your budget allows and what your volunteer base can do.
So with that said, especially with what your budget allows, we're hearing a lot about lists, right? So we have the voter list, we know who's been sent a ballot, we know who's returning a ballot. Do you do any more targeting? So Arizona's electorate right now is, typically a third, and a third, right? We know right now that our independent voters have the highest amount of registered voters, well, not unaffiliated, right? They're not affiliated with a political party. And then we see Republicans have the next highest amount, and then Democrats. So when we are looking at the political makeup of the state, or maybe, the particular jurisdiction that a candidate is running in, are we looking at any other demographics in terms of get out the vote, again, knowing, what does your budget look like? How important is targeting those communications?
I'll tell you this one. It's critical because you don't have the money to waste. Again, if you're Mark Kelly and you have $93 million, you can talk to 3 million voters. You don't care if they've never voted before, if they always vote, you can talk to all of them. Almost no one will have those sorts of resources. So you have to decide how you're going to focus. The voter list that we use, that Stacy has, that basically anyone can have access to, includes vote history. So I know if you voted in the last 4 elections, or 3 of the 4, or 2 of the 4, or you've never voted. If you've never voted, I'm probably not spending an awful lot of time and money trying to drag you out to a primary if my resources are limited. On the other hand, if I've got a ton of volunteers, then maybe that's a good place to put personal connection, is to somebody who doesn't usually vote, where you knock on the door and you make the personal appeal, like, this race is going to be decided by 42 votes. We got to get you to vote. So it's really not a function of the voter registration. Again, while the state voter registration numbers are close, so if you're statewide, that matters. Probably 21, 22 of the 30 legislative districts aren't close. Whoever wins the primary will win the general. So it's an entirely different thing. Now you're ignoring party affiliation because you're just focused on the primary. So in a Democrat primary, it's all Democrats and some independents. The question is, who are likely voters, who have a history of voting, who you can bring to the polls at a reasonable cost. So the targeting is critical.
And thank you for that note about the primaries, because, I know the topic here is run for office as a workshop, but if any voters who are not considering running, independent voters can vote in our primary, in our August primary. So just wanted to throw that out there as a reminder. We do have a question that I was going to ask Stacy to touch on, since she had mentioned lists before too, but how does a nonpartisan candidate obtain a voter list?
So it's a fundraising tool. I don't know how the Republicans work it, but for the Democratic Party, you get the list, obviously, you get access to VAN, to the database, through the Democratic Party. They won't give it to the independents, but there are lots of other options that you can use that if you are unaffiliated. The one that we use for some campaigns is a service called L2. Used to be lists and labels from 100 million years ago. It's now just called L2. You let them know that you're running. They charge you nothing to go dink around in the voter database. They only charge you for records that you pull. And to Constantine's point, you can even find out how long people sit on their ballots typically, and target your contact with those voters that aligns with what they typically do. You will learn that Stacy Pearson's household, which this is a true story, holds their ballots till the end. We always return by mail, but we hold them until the last final moment, mostly because I want to see what mail I'm going to get. And if you turn it in right away, most sophisticated campaigns take you off their mail list or their call list. I like to torture my family and make them continue to get called and texted and harassed. So anyway, the data is there. L2 is the service that we use, but I'm certain that if you Google it, you can look at some others that are affordable.
Perfect. Okay. And then Stacy and Tom, you both have backgrounds as journalists. So I wanted to get your take on this next question, and then of course get Constantine to chime in too. How important is it to have the media cover your campaign? Do candidates want media coverage on their campaign? Is that something that they should be trying to get? How should they be getting media coverage? And is that going to be a bonus? What are some of the challenges that come with that? Is it potentially worrisome. So in terms of, should a candidate be seeking media coverage for their campaign, whether that's to help, again, communicate their policy issues or with that name recognition, how important is that media coverage to a candidate's campaign? Tom, do you want to jump in on that with your background as a journalist?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I was a journalist quite a long time ago in Tucson, and I covered state politics both in Phoenix and Tucson, and covered legislative races. And at that period of time, we actually, it was a different world than anybody who's running today is. I mean, we did a feature article on every single legislative race. We did JP races. We put out a special section on all these elections. And we covered every single debate. I mean, we were out there and in the field and really covering at a level of granularity that doesn't exist anymore. And the resources aren't there in the news media to do that any longer. So the challenge that you're going to think about, I think, at the state level and at the legislative level, at least, is, how do you even get on the radar of a reporter who's covering, basically 90 different legislative races? How do you make yourself stand out? And like everybody's been saying, how do you make the calculation among different places to put your resources? So I don't know how. I'm not sure. I mean, I would defer to Stacy on how to allocate that. I do think, however, that you do want to be aware of who those folks are. You need to kind of know who the reporters are. You need to know who the reporters are at the independent news that you may get, or the Wrangler news if you live in where I live. You need to be kind of situationally aware of that. And then the reality is that a bad story, even in a publication that might be small, in a social media age, is a problem. And how you kind of deal with that is something that you have to have some mindfulness about.
Stacy, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree with what Tom just said, in that the coverage, the opportunities for coverage have declined significantly over the last, even 5 years, much less the last 20 years. But the community newspapers are still thriving, or the online websites are still thriving. Like the press kit has an extraordinarily well clicked, well visited series of news sites. The same is true in Wickenburg. So same is true, and the Tempe Wrangler, as Tom just mentioned. These local, these hyper local community news outlets now, I can't even call them papers anymore because some of them don't deliver, but these news outlets are where parents go to see the score or see the photo of their kid playing in the high school volleyball game. I mean, you attract this community of folks that are tuned in. And most newspapers, if it's city council race or above, or AC Central in Tucson, they still do candidate rundowns. And those where everybody has a photo, everybody has a little bio, and everyone in the race has an opportunity to answer a few questions. Those are very, 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 very important. And then in terms of additional kind of specialized media, if you are a member of the Jewish community, the Jewish News may do a profile on you. If you are the first Indian American woman running for council in wherever, there may be specialized publications. There is a specialized publication that will feature you. So look at if you're an ASU alumni, a member of the ASU Alumni Association, ASU's alumni magazine is worth a mention. So figure out what your profile, and take a look at your own LinkedIn and see what publications align with your identity. And those are very specialized opportunities.
Okay. And then Constantine, I don't know if you have any comments that you want to share on that question in particular, and how should a candidate be looking to get media coverage if they should? But I did want to ask you too, if you respond to that, maybe also touch on what are some tips for candidates when it also comes to crisis communications too. Let's say something comes up in their campaign, maybe they are getting all of this media coverage. What should candidates be considering if they find themselves in the middle of needing crisis communication support?
Yeah, sort of two opposites. How do I get media coverage? And the second question is, how do I make them stop covering me?
No.
Yeah, it's well, I mean, frankly, outrageous behavior gets attention, right? I mean, we see that on Instagram. If you want to build your following, you start shedding clothing apparently, and next thing you know, you got 1 million followers, and you're getting endorsement deals. So people tend to kind of behave outrageously as a way of attracting followings and getting attention. It's not healthy for the process. It's ultimately usually not healthy for the campaign either. Generally speaking, is if you can be right on an issue at the right time and in the right place, you can get coverage because it's a story. Even, we were talking the other day how, Katie Hobbs is down the border saying, gosh, we got a border security problem, and she can criticize the Biden administration. Whether you believe it or not, the fact of the matter is it's the right time and place to be talking about the border, and you'll get coverage for that. Republicans were getting press because they were registering voters at gas stations. Why? Because gas prices were, well, there are again now, but gas prices were sky high. It was easy to cover if you're the TV station, because we could just pick a gas station that's literally down the corner of your TV station. So again, the right story at the right time at the right place can get you coverage. Crisis communication is where you really do kind of want to lean into some pros, even if you don't have one on your campaign. If suddenly something goes wrong, it may be worth getting some professional advice, because there are different ways of taking them on. A lot of folks are gonna be like, well, I'm going to go on TV and I'm going to say everything. Not always the best advice. Hiding is not always the best advice. But when that does happen, what I would encourage candidates to do, and frankly, this is advice if you're going to work with a professional from the get-go as well, is tell that person the truth. Okay, regardless of what you ultimately end up telling the public. I always tell my candidates, I say, I'm like a priest or a doctor, except I can be subpoenaed. So tell me everything, but don't confess to a crime. But I need to know ahead of time. Stacy needs to know ahead of time what might come up, because there's some things you can get out in front of. We've had candidates where we've had, 10 years ago, I had a DUI. Okay, well, that we can literally put that into the bio, under lessons they've learned in their life, because okay, she got a DUI 10 years ago, but she's also since then spoken to groups about the importance of not even having one drink when you're out and having a designated driver. Like, this candidate did good with that lesson. So let's put it on the bio from day one. Now, you can't be attacked for it. It's one of the things you're actually bragging about. So, if it's a crisis or if it's a potential crisis, let the person who's giving you advice know the details so they can give you good advice.
All right. Well, we have just a few minutes left. And so we have one more question that I want to get to and get a response from both Stacy and Constantine. And then I have one more ending question for Tom, and then we'll wrap things up. So the question is, running for office seems like a club to which people need to be invited if they have any chance of winning. How often do people go from relative political anonymity to running a successful campaign? So Stacy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I could see why it would look like that. But the truth is that both parties, and not talking necessarily about independents, but both traditional parties are always looking for new candidates, looking for new folks to get on the bench, looking for people who are interested in serving. And so it's a matter of just reaching out and saying, hey, can I take you to coffee and talk to you about a potential run? Reaching out to people like Constantine and I, we'd put you in touch with friends, advisors, colleagues of ours, to just start talking about the process. So you really just need to make one phone call, and then the rest we will help guide along. And again, there are so many opportunities, and I forget what the number is now, but particularly in school boards, there are vacancies that they can't find candidates to fill. And so, it's extraordinarily important just to make a single phone call, and then the rest will really open up the door. Those doors would open up. And in terms of successes, how often does it happen? 2012, nobody had any idea who Paul Penzone was. That he might have been that guy who was, in full disclosure, I worked on his 12 and ran his 16 campaign, but nobody knew who that guy was. He was the guy that looked like the guy that might have been the silent witness guy that worked for Phoenix. So it happens relatively quickly. The same is true with Kathy Hoffman. As in education, when she ran, she was a teacher and a mom, and a soon-to-be new mom, and mad, and it was successful. So it's possible.
Constantine?
Yeah, if there's a club that meets regularly to pick candidates, they don't invite me to their meetings. A lot of the people that you see in office were not invited. A lot of the people you see in office are in office over the objections of what might be the club. So the club is powerful. The club, every party has theirs, and they're nice to have on your side because obviously they do have a certain amount of weight they can bring to a race. But if you want to serve, don't wait to be invited. That rarely happens. They rarely, they don't usually invite the right people anyway. Make yourself known. You can make yourself known to sort of the folks who have an outsized role in the process. Every once in a while, you just kick the door down yourself, and that can be an awful lot of fun too. But you do not need them to win, and that's one thing that Clean Elections has been helpful for over the years. And it's I think both parties right now are very people powered. They tend to be more bottom up than top down, particularly at the lower levels. If you're going to run for the United States Senate, you probably need to be invited. Okay, you're not going to raise $93 million over the objections of the establishment. But if you're running for city council or school board or state legislature, or even some of the county offices, you can kick that door down just fine.
All right. All right, Tom, I'm going to turn it to you for a very last question because I know we're pretty much out of time here, but I think this is important. And it might seem silly at first, but how does the candidate know that they've actually won their election? So, whether we're talking about, is this a council race? Is it 50% plus one of the votes, a plurality? And then how can that candidate have confidence in those results, even if it didn't go their way?
Or these days, Tom, how does a candidate know if they've lost their election?
Well, so a couple of answers to that. I mean, if you're getting into the question of the, it is true some cities have a primary that's nonpartisan, and then the basically what we refer to at the state level as top two advance to the general, and then whoever wins that election would be seated. For legislative races, it's a plurality, whoever gets the most votes, and for statewide races, it's a plurality. The way that, so after the ballots are counted, one of the big things that has captured the imagination, and I think we can blame Steve Kornacki for this, who obviously I don't know, but I blame him, is that we're actually getting ballots in during that time. That's not true at all. The set of ballots that are being counted are in, they are there. It is merely a question of counting them. And so as they're counted, their signatures on your ballot affidavit are checked. The ballots are tabulated, the tabulations are checked, and then there's a canvass at the county level, a canvass at the state level, and then you're issued either a certificate of nomination after a primary or a certificate of election. And that is a legal document that says you won. And all the cross checks that go into the checks and balances between the recorder and the elections department, the checks and balances between the hand count audit and the count, all that goes into the canvas that is then signed off on by your county board of supervisors and the Secretary of State. And in Arizona, I think I can speak for everybody who's an election official in Arizona when we say that you should have absolute confidence that every vote that is there is counted accurately, and there are procedures to challenge that if you need to, but the reality is that those kinds of things rarely result in any significant change.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us today. Again, you've been just your wealth of knowledge, and so we really appreciate your time and your expertise. To our viewers, again, this recording will be sent out in a follow-up email. It'll also be posted on the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership's website and YouTube channel. And if you have any questions, again, after the fact, if it's related to qualifying for the ballot and those, more procedural questions, you can reach Clean Elections at azcleanelections.gov. If you have questions for Constantine or Stacy, you can reach them at their websites. Again, Stacy is at lumenaz.com. Constantine is going to be at grassrootspartners.com. And again, we just want to thank you all so much for your time today. And again, a big thank you to the Arizona Center for Civic Leadership at the Flinn Foundation for hosting us, to all of the fellows. Thank you for joining us. And of course, to our members of the public, thank you so much. So have a great day. And again, thank you for your time today.